In this video, we're going to discuss a little bit about old naming of transition metals. So, the modern system makes things, if you see FeCl2, very easy. You just tell the charge on the metal, it is iron 2 chloride. Well, due to a lot of old trade treaties, locking in names, industrial standards, and just kind of cultural legacy, there's still a lot of old names that we still see for transition metals. For not every industry has moved over to the modern naming. So let's talk a little bit about it. First off, metal names. Why on earth is iron Fe? Well, Fe is actually ferrum. Old name for iron. You can see this in other things. Copper here is cuprum. This is actually why a lot of periodic table is in the different symbols. If you had things like sodium, which isn't a transition metal, but just to show it off, sodium in English is natrium. Lead, Pb, is plumbum. That one's actually still used a lot of the world. This is why plumbing is plumbing. The original plumbing was lead pipes. I've definitely had conversations where one of my Russian colleagues mentioned the plumbum toxicity in something, and I said, "What?" And he looked at me and he said, "What?" And we just stared at each other for about 30 seconds until one of us snaps our fingers and is like, oh, lead. So there's still use of some of these old names, but this is why the periodic table has a lot of symbols that don't seem to match the English pronunciation. Quick backstory on it, where it actually came from was Germany for the most part, unless it's an ancient name for like silver and gold. Germany was the powerhouse of chemistry for most of the 1800s and a good part of the 1900s, early 1900s. What happened though was World War II. A lot of the scientists fled. They were acquired by other countries at the end of the war. The remaining scientists were politely kidnapped by the US and the Soviet Union. And they went on to make the rockets and lots of other things. Germany had been the powerhouse of science. Well, during the Cold War, the United States became the powerhouse of science. We had the only intact physical infrastructure. We had an entire nation mobilized for development and technology and production. And so we were in a constant race with the Soviet Union to show that we were better. And so we pumped out a lot of technological gains. Consequence of it was a lot of Americans doing science. Well, if you've noticed anything about Americans, we don't really like other languages. So all these Germans got upset when we decided we were just going to call everything by the English terms. We upended a century and a half of chemistry and said, nope, we're going to call them by our words now. It kind of got into a polite science fight, went back and forth, and the end decision was that we would use the English names, but we would keep the original symbols, since the symbols were just kind of things you had to memorize anyways. Well, this is where it comes from, though, and it leads to problems with the old names. If you wanted iron 2 chloride in the old days, it was ferrous chloride. And if you wanted iron 3 chloride, so this was FeCl2, if you wanted FeCl3, it was ferric chloride. And so for the first part, it uses the old names, which not everybody's familiar with. But second, it has new suffixes, os and ic. Now, they do not tell you the charge. This is an iron with a 2+, and ferric is iron with a 3+. But if you were to make, say, some copper compounds, so I've got copper 1 and copper 2, this would be cuprose chloride and cupric chloride. So in this case, my copper with a 2+ ends in ic, where my iron 2+ ended in os. The ic and the os were comparative for that metal. They did not tell you what the actual charge was. They just said, hey, on this metal, whichever had more charge, that was the ic state. Whatever had less charge was the os state. And so os is less charged. Ic is more charged. Unfortunately, this meant you had to remember what the normal possible states were for every metal. Iron's 2 and 3, copper's 1 and 2, cobalt's 2 and 3, others are 2 and 4. They don't even just go by 1. Rare ones are like 3 and 4, 1 and 3. Like they can jump around, and you had to remember them all. As a result, this old system has been replaced with the much more straightforward, just tell the charge, using the English name. But we want you to see it. If you ever run into ferric chloride, it's still sold for things. Well, if you see a metallish sounding name with ic or us at the end, followed by an anion you recognize, you know that it is a transition metal compound that you are looking at.